thank you all for making it here. I know this has been quite a process so far, and I see some faces that have been here multiple times already, and thank you. And just to kick us off, I'm going to call our planning boards to meet to order. And I know we have a quorum already, and I'll introduce us all in a moment. And I'll also just mention a few things before we get going. If you're looking for a restroom, they are right outside. There's one by the stairs over there. There's another one on your left, I think it is, right over here. And there's also an exit if need be, right out there on your left. And so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm John Christ. I'm chair of the planning board and the planning committee. And I'll just introduce everyone else and see who's here. Susie Wood, I think, might be showing up. Planning board members. She's, I think, running a few minutes late this evening. There's Phil, right? We're right here.
Phil Ambrose, the non-recording executive.
Non-recording. I did not believe I see Neil, our select board member. Mike Ahern, right there. Mark not make it today, and Matt Getting doesn't. And or any of our alternates here tonight. Thanks. No. In addition, so the planning board has, well, when we started working on this housing project, formed a housing subcommittee, and a few of us from the planning board are also on there, including myself, Mike, Sue was on there for a little while, and Matt, who joins, not a planning board member, and a city college planning board member. And in addition, there we also have Patty Biederman, right over here, and Brian Chalmers, Dwight Eisenhower, and Bruce Wiggett, who could not be here tonight. And in addition, I'll introduce Joseph Perez, our town planner, who's right off inside there, and arriving any moment, stuck on Smooth 93 right now, are our consultants. So to give you a little bit of background, if you haven't been following all the way along, about a year and a half ago, I guess at this point, the town of Plymouth applied for a housing opportunity planning grant, and we received one, and it is funded the study, and our consultant, our planning group, who have been fantastic, and they've been guiding it through this process and really helping us collect data and run meetings like this and do a lot of work to put together a study like this. And so they've published several reports based on the various pieces of the study, our housing needs, our regulatory barriers, and really helping us kind of work through with the planning board and the housing committee where we'd like to go forward for regulatory changes. And so they've really been kind of instrumental in that. And with all of that, you know, we've done a lot in the past year of change. And we've learned a lot about what exists in Plymouth, what's on the ground, community. We've heard from the community at several of these meetings already. It was, again, wonderful to see you all that keep coming out. And we made progress. We pushed through several zoning amendments last year. We were working on them last year. This spring, in fact, Grace. And perhaps you could talk about those in a moment. But there's a lot to celebrate there. And with all that said, there's still more work to be done. And that's why we're here to see what that work might look like and to get communities all of your input into what that work might look like. And with that said, Joseph, we have to come up for a moment, or perhaps we could talk about some of the amendments we did pass the break at town meeting.
Yeah, thanks, John. So
we can probably stay together and
absolutely. Yeah, thanks, John. So, yeah, as John mentioned, a part of this study, it's a 3-phase study. So a little bit of background. In the end of 2022, the town of Plymouth received a grant from the Invest NH Planning and Zoning Grant Program. It was funded through ARPA money that was passed through to the state and then on to local governments for the purpose of hiring planning and zoning consultants to help them undergo a process of studying housing needs, studying their regulations as it relates to housing, and then beyond that, looking at what regulatory changes should take place based on the results of the first two phases. So the town was awarded those funds. The town contracted Barrett Planning Group, who will be here tonight as well as the professional planning consultant. So they have really been helpful all throughout the process in facilitating engagement and helping to analyze what we have and pull together some data about what's going on in Plymouth as it pertains to housing. So as a result of looking through our zoning, our regulations, so broadly speaking, our zoning is the regulation that dictates what is permitted on various pieces of land, how you can do various uses. So if you would like to develop something on a piece of property, your first place to look is the zoning ordinance. That tells you whether you can build that thing, and if so, how. So that's sort of the first place that you look when asking, does what we're allowing in town match what the folks who live in town would prefer to see? So in part, some of what came out of that was a realization that some of what is being regulated and some of the regulations don't necessarily align with what folks wanted to see, as we've heard in these various community meetings and community surveys and other forums like that. And also, in certain areas, what we are regulating, what we're requiring, would actually disallow much of our historic neighborhoods and parts of Plymouth that folks really expressed an interest in and a sort of positive feeling towards. But things like dimensional requirements were part of that. So in looking at permitted uses, that's sort of a cornerstone of the zoning ordinance is what is permitted in various parts of town. So a couple of permitted uses were changed in various districts. So there was we had a use that was, a multifamily dwelling, which allows up to 6 units in a building. That requires special exception, the multifamily residential district. That has changed. So today, multifamily dwellings are permitted in the multifamily district without having to get zoning board approval. Another housing type that folks expressed a lot of interest in was sort of a townhouse style, also known as a single-family attached condominiums, you might refer to them as, or townhouses. A new use was created in the zoning ordinance that specifically defines single-family attached dwellings. So these sort of townhouse units that may share a common wall on the side, but don't share a common room or ceiling with another dwelling unit. So sort of that side-by-side style. That became a permitted use in many parts of town, where previously it was subject to a little bit more requirements in some areas because it was lumped in under the same definition as a multifamily. When in reality, it sometimes makes sense to treat it a little bit differently, so you can regulate it differently in different parts of town. So that's a part of what changed. And then accessory dwelling units, you might think of them as in-law apartments, some kind of granny flats. There's a lot of backyard cottages, a lot of different colloquial terms, but broadly speaking, it's a smaller dwelling unit on the same property as a single-family dwelling, but it doesn't necessarily have the same size. So it might be a smaller dwelling unit, and one of the units, either the primary house or the accessory dwelling unit, that's owner-occupied. So it's sort of a limited second dwelling unit. That was changed from requiring a public hearing process in many parts of town to a allowed use in many parts of town. That was another one that there seemed to be a lot of interest in, and it's meetings and things like that. A lot of folks expressed that was something that they liked and they wanted to see. So that also changed. And then the other, another one of the sort of key changes, this was Amendment 3, was related to dimensional requirements. So dimensional requirements are, broadly speaking, how big of a lot do you need to develop a particular use? So if you want if you want to build a single family home, how big of a lot do you need? How far does that home have to be off the lot lines? How tall can it be? Those are things like setbacks, lot sizes, and, maximum heights. So in many of our historic districts, such as the Village residential area, you might think of Pleasant Street, Emerson Street, we had a lot of lots that per our current zoning would not be allowed to be built upon. These are single-family homes on smaller lots, which, they might be closer to the lot line that is current and was currently permitted. So some of the changes that were made to zoning were really to, in a sense, legalize uses that already existed in town, but in a previous duration of zoning were deemed unlawful. So part of it was looking backwards at areas that books identified as being areas of interest and trying to legalize those in some ways to allow them to change and grow over time, and in some ways to allow those patterns to be continued. So minimum lot size in that single-family residential area went down from half an acre, which was quite a bit larger than many lots in the district, to 10,000 square feet, where you'd have both public water and public sewer. That's an important differentiation. You need a little more lot area to be able to have a well or a septic system, and you need a little more lot area to be able to have both. So that did change, though, so that our village area was a little bit less non-conforming. And then a couple of other changes that were a little more, technical in nature, but dealt with the way that we regulated various uses. So the requirements that are applicable to you if you would like to develop some type of residential development, be it single-family dwellings, an accessory dwelling unit, or multifamily dwelling, or townhouses, things like parking requirements, how many buildings you can have on a lot, and what the list of criteria are for adding an accessory dwelling unit to an existing single-family home. And then lastly, which kind of ties into something that the planning board is talking about a little more currently, is an open space residential development standard. So an open space residential development is a use that existed in Plymouth. It was permitted. You sometimes hear them referred to as a cluster subdivision or a cluster development. These have been permitted in Plymouth for quite some time, but our regulations were a little bit out of date. They weren't really up to spec with what a lot of other towns are doing for really having better quality open space residential development. So that was another area that the planning board looked, and actually at their meeting on this coming Thursday, the planning board is having a public hearing on an amendment to the subdivision regulations, which would change and update the requirements applicable to an open space residential development. So for those who may not be familiar, it's kind of an odd term. It's used, different terms are used in a lot of different communities for this type of development, but generally speaking, an open space residential development relies on the fundamental idea that if you were allowed to develop, say, 10 houses on a piece of land, or some number of houses, given the requirements that we talked about earlier, you have enough lot area, there's enough road frontage, you can sit them within the setbacks. There's a certain number of dwelling units that you can build on a piece of property. So the underlying premise of open space residential development is, what if you shrunk down those lots and had them on a smaller portion of that property while still preserving the same overall density or similar overall density? So you might have all of those 10 houses on half of the lot, and then the other half gets preserved as some type of open space, be it conservation land or a community park for the residents. So, again, it's sometimes referred to as a cluster development because it allows clustering of the homes on smaller lots on a portion of an underlying parcel. And in some cases, it can allow for reduced costs of development. In fact, in many cases, having smaller, narrow lots requires less miles of road and utilities, drainage, water, sewer. Every additional foot of that adds its cost for development, so it can lower the cost of development, but it can also provide the residents with some amenities that they might enjoy, like having conservation land that all of the residents have access to, or having some type of community park space. It could be a variety of different ways it could look. Maybe it's preserving a field, agricultural property, and allowing that to stay in agricultural use while a small portion is developed for housing without reducing the overall number of units that can be built, but allowing them to be built on a smaller portion of the area that would otherwise all be developed. So it's a tool that, you know, is becoming popular. There are a couple in town. You might be familiar with the River Ridge development. So this was developed. Houses in that development are on relatively small lots. And then there's some common open space down towards the river. There's a trail through it. But in order to be allowed to have those smaller lots at the time, they were required to set aside that area as open space, which is commonly owned in that case by the residents. So, you know, it can, not every open space residential development looks the same, but generally speaking, how the town allows these to be developed, things like how do you determine how many colors could be developed on the underlying tract in the first place? There's a couple of different schools of thought on it. So a way to make that a little bit more straightforward and more consistent is continuous formula, which is something that the planning board has looked at as is in the current proposed amendment to the subdivision regulations. So it's a base formula that helps make it a little bit more consistent and easy to determine what that base number is. So the formula could determine 10 units are permitted. You can have 10 houses on this underlying lot, and then following the steps in that open space residential development set of standards, you can then reduce those. If it was ordinarily a 1 acre lot that was required for each house, you could scale that back, have the houses in half an acre or even less perhaps, depending on utilities. Perhaps they have a community septic system, or perhaps they tie in water and sewer. So those are a type of development that, you know, when we spoke to the community, a lot of input from the survey especially, but also from community meetings, just that folks were interested in smaller single-family homes, starter homes that might be a little more affordable and lower maintenance. Maybe they have a level, maybe they have a less yard lots. So it's something that really, you know, people seem to have an interest in. But how can you allow those to be built in a way that actually allows them to be at more of a starter home price point? You can cut down on the amount of road that has to be built for the development. That is a way there to lower the cost. Then smaller lots, you allow you to do that. So tonight at this meeting, we're going to soon I'll turn it over to our consultant, who will give you a little more about a little more information about the sequence of events for tonight. But generally, we're going to start with some information from them. But we also want to hear from you. So after they give a presentation, we're going to ask everybody to sort of break off into little breakout groups and have some discussions centered around a series of questions that touch on the idea of where would you like to see the town go next? Is there something that so far in this process hasn't been given enough consideration that you'd like to see taken up in the future? Is there something that, one idea is what is appropriate in the area surrounding the Tenny Mountain Ski area? There's want to hear from you, and we want to hear, what folks are comfortable with. And we'll have a little bit of information that will be provided, help you sort of work through those questions as a group. And we'll have, at each station, we'll have a facilitator who will be sort of guiding the group through the discussion and providing the questions and providing information. And we'll also have a note taker who will have a paper on the table. And as people share their thoughts, the note taker will be writing on these big pads of paper what they hear, what people in the group have to say. So if you think there's something that you want to make sure is captured, and you don't feel it's been exactly captured on the note pad, that's why it's right out there. So you can say, well, I really meant it more in this way. It gives you an opportunity to see and make sure that your thoughts are captured in a way that reflects, the intent of them. So that's the purpose of having a separate facilitator and note taker. Your facilitators are likely going to be members of either the planning board or the housing committee. Your note takers may be other planning board or housing committee members. They may be members of staff. They may be members from the Barrett planning group. So that is another, that's kind of going to be a part 2 of this project. But, once we get into that, I definitely encourage everyone to take some time to look through each of those questions and sort of think about, use the visuals, the informational materials that are out on the table, help you inform your answers and come up with something that really reflects, what your thoughts are. Because really the purpose of this meeting is to hear from you. There's been a series of community meetings throughout this process, and this is not the end of the process. This is a look at what the next phase could be. So, thanks everyone for your time, and I will turn it over here to our consultants from Barrett Planning Group, Alexis Lanzalotta and Judy Barrett. And again, I want to really thank everyone for coming out, because there would be no housing study. This project wouldn't be possible without folks coming and giving their input and helping to shape where things go. So again, it's Joseph Perez, town planner, and you're always welcome to come by and ask questions. But in the meantime, I'll give it a rest, and I'll turn it over to someone else. And
Thank you, Phil.
thanks for this.
How can I do this?
Hello, thank you, everybody, and I really appreciate your patience. Actually, navigating our way up here, just feeling. It's good to see familiar faces here. I know I've gotten to chat with quite a few of you throughout this process, and also some new faces here. So let me just get this going. As Joseph mentioned, we're going to give a very brief presentation going over some of the project background information. And I can probably skip over the part where Joseph already spoke to you about the zoning amendments, which came forward as a result of the housing study. Actually, very happy.
So, if you really talk about things, oh, I see what region. I'm not changed.
No problem.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
So, this was some face here.
excuse me.
Yes.
Simon does.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi.
Rings.
I'm going to send two. Could be chilling. So,
So,
you
for those of you who don't know, that the project team behind this ongoing housing study that has been going on for over a year now, there is a housing committee behind this. Up there you can see the members past and present. We have many of them here tonight. Joseph, did the committee members already get kind of acquainted? Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then for staff, Joseph has really been kind of leading the show here. And then we, the consultants, were from Barrett Planning Group. My colleague, Judy Barrett, has been the lead on this, as myself, Alexis Lanzalotta, and our colleague, Will Downey, also, who is not with us this evening. But we are the three faces who've been really working on this with the town. So we do have our presentation. Like I said, I can keep it brief, especially because I know Joseph already went over the zoning amendments with you. But I want to just give some project background. And then talk about some of the recommendations from the study, and then what the status currently is. There are recommendations that came out of the housing study, which is available online in two phases. There's a phase 1 report, which is really the needs assessment, and then phase 2, which is an audit of your kind of regulatory structure, and then recommendations from there. And so the way I think of it is those recommendations currently are kind of in three buckets. There's the bucket of recommendations that have been addressed. They were brought to town meeting in the form of warrant articles for zoning amendments, all of which passed, which was really wonderful to see. And then there's another bucket of recommendations that the housing committee and the planning board weren't quite ready to bring forward to town meeting yet, because that was already a lot to bring to the residents of Plymouth. And so wanted to kind of stagger out. And then so those recommendations that haven't gone forward yet, that's primarily the discussion groups that you'll be taking part in tonight, really focusing on some of those potential amendments that are not yet addressed, but I think are probably next on the horizon. And then the kind of third bucket are other recommendations that we, think the town should go forward with. Probably not maybe in this next wave of engagement, but they are in the report as things that should be kept on the horizon. and we will go over what those are as well. So this came out of, as Joseph probably pointed out, the Invest New Hampshire Housing Opportunity Planning Grant, which recently the state has allocated another funding round for, which is great. But the state committed $100 million from ARPA funds really to focus on increasing New Hampshire's housing supply. So there were different grants underneath this funding bucket for capital projects, municipal incentive grants, and then municipal planning and zoning grants, which is what this program is, known as the Housing Opportunity Program or HOPS program. So Plymouth received a HOP grant with 3 components. So the housing needs analysis that I mentioned, that was phase 1 of our report. The regulatory audit, which was phase 2, and then the regulatory development, which are those warrant articles that went to your town meeting, that's really phase 3. And phase 3 is actually still going on because there are a couple of the regulatory amendments that we are bringing forward to you for discussion tonight. So that, breaking down by those phases. So the needs assessment, that was really kind of the early part of the project that was completed in its initial draft almost a year ago now, which is wild time-wise. And then the regulatory audit was kind of going on alongside that, but then the regulatory development really took quite a bit of time because the planning board and the housing committee really worked together for several months to figure out which of those recommendations should be fleshed out as actual potential zoning amendments. So really that was going on over quite a few months and were brought forward to town meeting 2024. So in terms of what's next, well, we're encouraging continued exploration of some of those housing study recommendations. So it's really ongoing. I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of why this study focuses so much on zoning. There are many, many barriers to housing, both housing production and development, but also being able to access housing or be able to retain housing in a community, and we understand that. The focus of this grant program is really looking at, as much as possible, regulatory barriers. So those are barriers within your zoning, subdivision regulations, site plan review, things like that. Things that are kind of more directly in the town's control than some other barriers that really aren't easily in your control. So it's about looking at what you can address, which is primarily your local regulations. So just to give some context, what you see here in your zoning ordinance, there is a very lengthy use regulations table, which when you're in your discussion groups, we have handouts that actually have this fleshed out. On this slide, we've only included the residential uses because this is a housing study, so that's our focus. But there are also commercial uses, agricultural uses, miscellaneous uses, industrial uses, and civic uses, and so on and so forth. So when you get in your groups, just for reference, you'll have kind of a guide showing what's allowed across each of your 7 zoning districts. So we wanted on this slide, though, to really show the residential uses. And what you see here, if you see the little exclamation point, that indicates that a use is allowed by what's called special exception, which is when the applicant needs to go before your ZBA to basically follow certain criteria to be granted that special exceptions. Then you also have the no symbol. That means it is not allowed in a particular district. And then the check marks mean that something is permitted by right. So the last time we were in front of your community, this table looked a little bit different because you've since had some zoning amendments. So for example, the accessory dwelling unit row that you see right up at the top, that was not allowed by right before. That was a conditional use permit by the planning board. So that has changed. It is going in your recent zoning amendment. It is allowed by special exception in single family residential. So that's one area that's changed here. Another area that's changed is the multifamily, which under your zoning is not to exceed 6 units per building. But, one of the things we noticed right away when we came into your community was that you had a multifamily residential zone where multifamily was not allowed by right. So that change was made. So that's now a check mark. And then also towards the bottom, the single family attached is a new use that was added to your use table in this wave of zoning amendments. And the kind of distinction there, single family attached is more what you think of kind of a townhouse where it's side-by-side units, where each unit has an entrance at grade. There are no units above or below, it's just side-by-side. And we thought that would be helpful to include in your use table as distinct from multifamily, which, you know, before this zoning amendment could be townhouses, but it allows you to distinguish between the two so that you can maybe allow single family attached in areas where you're not necessarily allowing multifamily of other types, you know, might be stacked units or up to 6 units. So it just gives a little more flexibility for those townhomes, which we heard kind of early on in the community engagement was kind of a desirable housing type. And then, so that's how your zoning is structured. You have those 7 districts, and the green that you see on that map, that is by far the largest district, which is the agricultural zone. The other thing that you will see when you go to your discussion groups is the agricultural zone by far has the most things that are allowed within it. So actually 2 of the overlay districts that the Housing Committee has kind of explored and considered would be within the agricultural zone. So one of the things that we're kind of asking you to consider is what might you want to do within certain areas throughout the town that's different than what's already allowed in the agricultural zone. So the other thing just to be aware of within the zoning, and this is important for framing the discussions you'll have tonight, it's not just about what's allowed by use, it's the density. And this is one of the things that we heard quite a bit from developers that we engaged with throughout this process, both in, you know, whether they're nonprofit, for-profit, in terms of being able to keep development affordable. The density matters, and so one of the things that we looked at with the wave of zoning amendments was how to diversify it a bit across your zoning districts, and to bring it down in some areas. So your single-family residential, as long as there's access to sewer and water, now has a smaller lot size, which is in alignment with much more of the lots that are already developed in the area. So that is something to consider, because one of the things that we heard, especially in the agricultural zone, where the lot sizes are still quite large, is even if a use may be allowed, it still might be hard to make more kind of naturally affordable residential development in a way that would be developmentally feasible. Then the other thing to keep in mind that can kind of relate to how something could be developed, there are other requirements within your zoning outside of the lot size requirements. So something that varies by district and presence of sewer is the frontage, which is the width of the lot along the main road. And when you get to your discussion groups, that will also be laid out by district for you. Another thing that varies by districts are the setbacks, so where on the lot that building can go. And then the maximum lot coverage as well. There are a couple of things that are uniform across the districts, and this is one of the things that when you consider where there might be room for a little more flexibility within an overlay district, the building height, which is 35 feet townwide, and then the units per building within multifamily, which is 6 units. So those are some things that are uniform across the districts instead of having kind of that variability that might allow you to kind of create different, a different feel from one district to the next. The next section here really goes over those zoning amendments that Joseph already went over with you, right? Joseph, do you feel that that overview of the 7 zoning amendments is pretty?
Yeah, which one? Sure. 35 feet is got how the stories.
2.5?
They just.
And that's a color, and that's up to it.
So,
Slay.
there are, as I mentioned, there are these kind of buckets for those study recommendations. So quite a few of them went forward in your most recent annual town meeting. However, the second bucket, which we're going to focus on in the discussion groups, are those ones that the Housing Committee and Planning Board are, you know, feeling a little more ready to potentially pursue now with a little more community engagement. So I know that our helpers have been getting all of the groups ready so that they'll have all of the materials for you when we're ready to move. But there are 5 discussion questions we're going to ask for your input on. So I'm going to very quickly walk you through them. The first one, if you've been attending these meetings, you've already been asked, but we are going to frame it in a little more detail now. So the kind of a broad question is, where should residential development be encouraged in the future and what kind? So we're asking, as we did when we asked this question before, to consider building types, size, affordability, the potential for mixed commercial and residential uses, other relevant factors. Each table will have a map that has kind of an additional piece of information on it. In your 2018 master plan, there were areas that were defined as being most likely to experience demand for future development. So we really wanted to highlight those on the map for you to see if you agree. So you may not agree, and you may want to put your housing stickers outside of those, but we do want to hear, and we want you to discuss with your facilitators, do you think those areas that were identified in the master plan make sense? I will say that 2 of them really are in alignment with a couple of the overlay districts that the Housing Committee and Planning Board had discussed. So that's the first question. The second question is really going to focus on the Tenny Mountain area. And this is one of the overlay districts that is under consideration. We're still working in that phase 3, that regulatory development, to come up with something that might work for the town. So we want to get an understanding of what extent and types of additional development would you support on or around Tenny Mountain, if any. And then, as I pointed out, if you look at that table of uses, there's already a lot of uses allowed in the agricultural district, which is where Tenny Mountain is. So we want to get a sense of, would you support relaxing any dimensional or other zoning requirements in an overlay specific to that area in order to encourage development, to make it more cost effective, to make it more feasible? And if so, are there kind of trade-offs or mitigation measures that you would like to see? So if there is, on Tenny Mountain, if you'd be willing to see, more building height or something like that, what kind of community protection measures do you want to see? What else matters to make sure it still gets preserved? Because those sorts of things can help the planning board potentially, if they want to explore some sort of conditional use permit for, relaxing some of those zoning requirements, it can help them kind of understand what sort of criteria they might want to include within that. The third question, zoning incentives for affordability. So we want you to think kind of broadly about affordability, not just, income restricted units, but also just things that can, naturally be more affordable. So we're asking in this question, would you support zoning incentives to allow additional units in exchange for reasonable measures that could reduce the cost of homes within a development? So if you're talking about, a subdivision of single family homes, for example, is there some sort of trade-off that where a developer would still be able to, make the developmentally feasible project, but you're also getting something as a town in exchange? So one idea that the Housing Committee has discussed off and on is including a number of units priced at certain affordability thresholds in exchange for more market rate units. Or another more recent idea has been allowing more density in exchange for maybe smaller building footprints, so you're creating that natural affordability. So things like that. The fourth question is barriers. What are the most significant barriers for households looking to move to or remain in Plymouth? Did any of these barriers influence your decision to live in the community? Does it influence your decision to stay? And then the kind of big piece there, what steps, if any, would you support the town taking to reduce the impact of those barriers? Yeah. So, where is it the town of Plymouth's responsibility to say, hey, this is a problem, what should we do about it, versus not? And then the final question actually has to do with the other overlay that the Housing Committee considered, which was the Fairgrounds Road area. So as a result of this housing study, the town explored several zoning amendments, most of which advanced the town meeting and passed. But there was a potential amendment that did not go forward for a residential overlay on Fairgrounds Road. And the Planning Board and Housing Committee just wanted to make sure that they were getting more resident input before bringing that forward. And so we want to hear from you. What future steps should the town take to involve residents, especially if they potentially live in an area that would be affected? So think town-wide, what sorts of things can the town do? How did you hear about this meeting? What else, could the town do to make sure others, especially those who might be affected directly by a zoning amendment, hear about it? So that's kind of a more broad discussion point there. We are going to go into these discussion groups for you to get a chance to answer these questions. We will come back and report out and have kind of open discussion, and then we'll also talk about that kind of other third bucket of other recommendations that were in the study that we want the town to consider in the future. So, Weston, yes.
Yeah, your uses allowed by district under residential uses do have manufactured housing blanked out on both single and multifamily. Now up here where the cost of housing is almost 400 grand, how did my granddaughter get a house in Plymouth?
Great question.
That is a great question, and I think that is something I hope you bring to your group. And we can talk more in the open discussion at the end as well. But what that would look like in terms of zoning is what other districts might that be allowed? Because
I live in a double wide right now, of course, with our new tax increase.
yeah, I believe, and I'm not sure, Joseph, if you can speak more specifically to this, if that's more about manufactured, park or manufactured homes in general. Offhand, I'm not sure
What was the question again?
about where manufactured housing is currently allowed.
Sure. Manufactured housing in Plymouth is allowed by right in the agricultural zoning district. That's about 80 to 85% of the land area. So it is a situation where, there are state statutes about where or how much of the town has to allow for manufactured housing as a use. So manufactured housing can be in parks or on individual lots. And in Plymouth, there are options within that. We have manufactured housing units on both in the community. So it's pretty broad. It's not permitted in the single-family residential zone, however. So that's the more around town area.
Before we get into too many questions right now, we are going to have an open session at the end for question and answer and broader discussions. I think it would be good at this point, unless you have a question about the mechanics of what we're doing, to go into breakout sessions for a half hour, then come back and have this bigger discussion again. So we can ask questions.
Not about mechanics. I just want to get a clear definition of something real fast, make sure I understand it. About what when you refer to an overlay, what does that entail?
So an overlay is the way to create a district that may be smaller than a bigger district that you might not want to change the rules for in its entirety. For example, the agricultural district's really big. Well, maybe you want to make a change, but not that would affect the entire district. So you can create what's called an overlay and geographically define it on your zoning map so it applies just in part of the agricultural district. Does that make sense?
So it would still retain an agricultural district
Underneath.
zoning underneath,
Yes.
but it would just be this specific area has other exceptions for it.
So you could continue if you owned land in the agricultural district to do whatever the agricultural district allows, but then you also could choose to carry out activities that are allowed only in the overlay. Okay.
Like so that we're talking. Okay, great. So at this time, there are 5 tables, and I'm wondering, I'm hoping that the noise won't be too much of an issue. If need be, we may move a couple of tables out in that space. But what I'll ask you to do, if you want to stand, fine. If you would like to sit around your table, feel free to grab your bring your chair with you. But you're going to, let's see, so Stu, you're at right over there. Is that going to be your home? That's awesome. Sorry, normally I would have had this all stationed after me. Yeah. Mike, you want to be at that station right over there?
Sure.
And then,
Sure.
so that's correct.
Then it's out.
Shut people should prompt you to over to that table because that is in station.
That station is with that. It's this.
Yeah, so that not all groups probably got to finish. But in the interest of time, we want to make sure that we have a chance to attend kind of an open discussion. And also, I do want to direct your attention to, we wanted to provide all of those questions for you to be able to respond on your own if you did not feel you had ample opportunity in the group where you had additional thoughts you wanted to share. So we encourage you to fill this out. And if, if you need a pen or anything, I'm sure Judy has plenty of pens for you. But just take a minute and fill those if you'd like us. We'll collect it at the end. But we did want to, in the interest of time, I think I would just ask each facilitator to share kind of some common takeaway that came out of their discussion. A top takeaway that came out of their discussion. And I would say in my group, in open discussion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a big thing that came out of our group was just the sense that cost is the biggest burden, and you know, a lot of that has to do with the ways that development is naturally occurring. It's not going to yield affordable residential development. So we talked about some, you know, solutions to. John, were there any kind of key takeaways that came out of your group, or key takeaway that you want to enjoy?
Thank you. So the key takeaway really were targeted density, preserving some of our open space, and what that would look like is significantly greater density in certain parts of town, including some of the multifamily residential college area downtown and Tenny Mountains Highway with larger multifamily buildings over 35 feet, and more development at Tenny Mountain as well, and giving some flexibility there, maybe kind of master plan based. And so there seemed to be a pretty good appetite for targeted density so we can get to the affordable units and not just have them all over town, so we can preserve some of the open space.
Awesome. Thank you. And I believe that was that from the place.
Small action, please. So,
Actually,
one of our common themes was affordability because of availability, increased density in some certain areas, and then the town being able to accept change and develop in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
So we had 3 people that lived off of Fairgrounds Road, and those 3 people had some good comments before we did any type of extra housing incentives and overlays. The snow removal concerns, the lack of sidewalks for pedestrians walking if we're putting in housing. Another, obviously, taxes. The nonprofits that are in the town, so we'll increase the property taxes, which are a barrier to buying in Plymouth. That's about it. Those are the 2 main things that I learned.
Great.
When the folks that are living away from Fairgrounds Road thinks that Fairgrounds Road would be a great place.
That's what imagine. Thank you. Thank you. And then Stu.
Great, though. Yeah, always. We also talked about a little more density. We had a lot of discussion about environmentally making sure that it was sound decisions in the town. The couple people that were in our group were newer to some of the community discussions, so we had, we had some other things to discuss. Discussed also, again, we talked a little bit about infrastructure as an issue. We definitely talked and were in favor of relaxing some of the restrictions like height of buildings, number of units in overlay in order to create more density, same as everyone else. Obviously, a barrier, taxes. We talked a lot about not-for-profit so that people understand. Can someone refresh our memories? We guessed at the percentage of land in Plymouth that's not for profit.
Someone had the answer, 51%.
51? I thought it was higher than that, but anyway, it's a lot of land in Plymouth. So we talked about when you take that number and you take what's actually buildable, what's left in the town. We talked a lot about that. One of the barriers for town, again, is affordable on housing. And we talked a little bit about getting people to meetings, definitely including people in the overlay areas. We had more one-shore signboards, but the committee felt that was great in the group. In more areas of town.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. And so we will, as we've done for the other meetings, we'll compile all of the notes and make sure that if anything, didn't get captured in those report out step, we will have it. I mentioned that there were kind of these, there's a third bucket of things that were included in the plan that we do recognize are important. And especially, I think the more we've worked with the town over the last year, we really see the importance of now, especially given some of the things that that you all just discussed in your report outs. Do you want to take this one?
I do. And please excuse the spelling error in the 4th bullet. I just saw it, and you're just going to have to excuse it. So if there were other recommendations or other issues raised, and I didn't know if I would throw these out, maybe get a little bit of feedback from all of you while you're in the room. One is the environmentally sensitive zone in your community has some regulatory pieces to it that actually can create a conflict for landowners. So the issue here is not whether environmental protection matters. Of course it matters. The issue is really when you have regulations that create sort of an internal conflict, does that then become a barrier to development that maybe doesn't make sense? So in that particular zone, and Mike, you may have something to say about this too, but I know you brought it up as well enough for you on the spot. But you have setback requirements in that zone to the rivers and then setback to the lake. And when you put all those setbacks together and the way it's written, you end up creating a situation where some lots in that district are simply not developable without a variance. It's because the zoning is not well written. It's not because you would not want to protect those resources. It's the way the zoning is written. So we just want to point out that that's sort of something that needs to be looked at. Is it's clarity of what they're trying to connect.
Clarity is ambiguous nature.
Yes.
The environmentally sensitive zone, not necessarily making it unbuildable, but it can create a lot of issues in the courts.
Oh, it does, and I don't disagree with that. The particular piece we picked at was the connection between these setback requirements, which when you read the text of the zoning, which anybody should be able to do and understand what's required, you end up with this conflict that would really put some property owners in a position where the only way they can do anything with their land is to go and get a variance, which is really a significant impediment. I don't care if it's housing or commercial development or whatever. It's just something to be aware of.
I think it's important to remember that some of the zoning, some of the land use restrictions against lakes and rivers are state-oriented, not.
Absolutely. And this is one point.
Yep.
Absolutely, you're correct. This is a local requirement that's frankly just not well written, to be honest with you.
And Dick is right that our environmentally sensitive zone wasn't enacted prior to the state's Rivers and Rivers Act.
Yeah, it was enacted before.
Right. So then the state came in and really protected the way, and it's people, developers come in and they know that. And if it could be used in Plymouth, that'd be kind of great. But we have something that's a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah. I mean, what matters is protecting the resource, not stopping development. I think that's kind of the point to sort of get in mind. Another thing we had talked about was your zoning ordinance is really hard to read. But I said, first time we cracked this thing open, I thought, oh my Lord, oh my goodness, this is older than I am, and you don't want to know how old that is. It needs to be updated. And I don't, even if you didn't touch a single policy yet, just say, we don't want to argue about policy anymore. It needs to be rewritten. It needs to be in one voice. I don't know how many of you remember taking English classes in college or high school, but you know what voice is? It's kind of it's a way of of hearing a text. You have so many voices in the zoning ordinance that it really is just very difficult to follow. The codification of it, meaning the numbering and structure, is also difficult to follow. So even if you never made another policy change, because Lord, you've already done quite a bit this year, I mean, to your credit, you did a lot. Mm-hmm. If you touch another policy piece of this to clean this ordinance up, so a normal person can open up the ordinance, look at the map and say, that's where my property is, and read what the ordinance says and say, I know what I can do with my land. It's just not clear. It's not well organized. The language is confusing.
May I add one thing to that? That we, in that recod is also when you catch things. Part of why I think there's that the issue of the voice not being consistent. When one update happens from one year to the next, there's always these missing pieces that don't get caught. And then, so there's inconsistencies within the zoning as it relates perhaps to subdivision regs, your site plan review. So just all of that needing to be streamlined for ease of use.
And it happens in the most innocent of ways. A community decides to make a change in their zoning, whether to enable or disable something. And so you focus on a particular section of the ordinance that you say, that's where the problem is. And nobody ever kind of goes back and does a whole ordinance review to see where a new change might create an inconsistency with something else that's left intact. That's the kind of stuff that gets picked up in a recodification, and it really needs to be done. the other thing that we sort of picked on half humorously is, what do you think community character actually means? So it's referred to in your zoning ordinance and your site plan regulations. If you had to define community character in 6 words, what would you say?
Surely New England, whatever.
A what?
Early New England, whatever.
Curling New England. That's boring. But the else have another thought? We're not going to do this too long.
Just sort of here ready for somebody else to use. Somebody could use none.
Yeah,
Human scale is really important.
Humans, and what does human scale mean?
It means that things are easy for the deaf in access and for people to move around. So I think it's things that are made to be easy for people to gather. In particular, gathering is really big.
Yeah.
And made for things too. So I think, for instance, neighborhoods are really important because neighborhoods are places where families can gather, right? So we haven't really worked on neighborhoods.
Yeah, there's not a lot of place consciousness, but there's plenty of language around community character, which is not defined. So that's the sort of thing that can turn into an argument in the middle of a permitting process. And it's hard for boards to resolve it, and it's hard for applicants to know what the boards actually want to be. Site development standards, here's where the typo is, I fully admit. Sometimes you have very legitimate kind of standards, and other times you kind of read it again and you say, is this too much? And we're not going to suggest that you do away with quality. Actually, I think what you want is to be clear about the qualities that you want. And there's a big difference. But it's also sometimes ordinances, not just yours, will place expectations on developers to do certain things as part of the development process, which may end up being a lot for someone to do. And are there circumstances where perhaps some things should be waived or could be reduced, at the same time not creating a situation where the town ends up down the road with more of a burden to compensate for something that a developer should have done in the first place. So just sort of really being clear about what is a standard really a legitimate public need versus something that's just inexplicably onerous. Those kinds of discussions, I think, really would benefit your town here. The other thing that your zoning, a lot of zoning consists is, what do you do when you have a lot that's in more than one zoning district? And you have a lot of that in this town because of the way your zoning districts were drawn. And sometimes when we get hired by communities to help fix this sort of thing, they say, well, just take all the districts now to parcel lines. Well, it's sometimes hard to do that when you have a lot of large parcels. So you're probably going to endure with having some split lots in your community. And the question is, how do you deal with those? Right now, what your ordinance says is, if you have a split lot, the rules of the most restrictive district apply. Well, that may or may not make sense if the most restricted district isn't a lot of the lot, but now you're kind of subjecting land that perhaps could be developed for a more economic use to not be able to do so simply because the lot is split. So communities have different policies around this, but I think it's something you want to look at so that you have a way to say, look, if most of the land is in a district that's less restrictive, why would we say it has to be subjected to the most restrictive district that happens to occupy a small piece of it? So it's something that you should look at. And then the other thing, I think, we always struggle with this, like when we start a zoning project. What are you trying to do with this district? What is the intent of this zone? And your zoning doesn't tell us. So, you have, which is fine, a zoning scheme in your community where a lot of things are allowed in your agricultural district that are not allowed somewhere else. There's policy sets with that. I'm not questioning it, except to say that at some point you kind of ask, well, what really is this district supposed to be? Versus, well, what do you want to have in that multifamily district? What do you want your single family district to be? What does single family even mean? And what are the purposes of your downtown district? So just even having in your zoning the purpose of this district is X. When you're now a planning board member or a ZBA member and you've got someone coming to you for a special exception or conditional use permit, to be able to go back to those purpose statements and say, okay, I'm trying to resolve something that this applicant's asking me to figure out. And right now I have no guidance in the zoning ordinance whatsoever. if I knew what the purpose of this district was, if it was clearly said, then an applicant would get it, a board would get it, and I think the general community would then be able to understand why are certain things allowed here and not here. There's no explanation of the zoning ordinance at all. So those are kinds of things that I think you're going to want to look at. And the other thing I always ask is, you're a town that recently had a master plan done. How many of you think a master plan matters? Does anybody here think a master plan is important? You do. Do you have any idea what your master plan says? And I'm not asking this to be competitive. It's well done. Yeah, it's pretty well done. It's a plan. It's very clear. I just would encourage you to think about this. You're not the only community in this boat. You do a master plan, you try to implement some of it, it hit the wall. And then all of a sudden, everybody stops talking about the master plan, starts talking about stuff. The hardest part about master plan implementation is being able to look at why did something fail and figure out how to retweak it and take it back and keep going. You need to look at your master plan and think about, is this really what we say we want to do? Because if it's not, maybe you should change your master plan. If it is what you want, then I think the message from the planning team is implement it. Because right now, you're not. You're not. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Chairman? Did we forget something?
I don't know what you did. I think you said quite a lot. I think it's all good.
Okay.
Yes. I think this week time to hear from.
Yeah. So how do you want to handle this? Do you want to from the microphone and not recording?
I would say just speak up, and hopefully the mic picks you up. And as usual at a planning board meeting, identify yourself and say your comment or ask your question. And
Whatever it is.
yes.
I got two questions. John Randlett, town of Plymouth. How many homes, when we talk about needing additional housing, how many homes are we talking about?
2,000.
That's
2,000.
Well, by what time? Just the time frame depends as well. What, work to read that immediately? Or I should tell 10, 20 years?
I'm talking 15-year plan.
So let me tell you why that's a hard question to answer. I'm going to frustrate you, I bet. Well, it depends on the type of housing and the households that have the need.
Well, right.
So you could say, well, we need 2,000 single-family homes. I'm making up a number. I'm not saying you need 2,000 single-family, but let's say that's what you needed. Well, for home. So if you don't really care about affordability, for example, you'd say big houses are fine.
Yeah. Well, I understand it. The other question, there was a comment made about we have an apartment available. Someone else has an apartment available. The only people that have come to talk to me are people from Laconia and Franklin. And we know those towns have a problem. So getting people in from those towns into here, you're going to end up with the same situation.
Is everybody in those towns a problem? Is everyone in those towns a problem?
No.
No,
There's no. What I'm saying is, if we've got a town that I've been here 20 years, my wife's been here 80 years, and in the same house, okay? And, we have a community that we love, we're all together, we have differences, but when it comes to the community, you come together.
Yep.
Okay, irregardless of personal feelings. But I mean, if these people want, they want to come in to me, they want to come in and get what we have. But once you do that, then you lose some of it. And I think that's what's happened with Laconia and Franklin. And, I don't know why the people are moving from, but I'm saying, what does Plymouth need? It's Plymouth.
That's decided to kind of acknowledge that and that concern, but also at the same time recognize that if Plymouth is going to continue to prosper and grow its economic base and have a tax base, it needs not only new people, but it needs people who can work the jobs that we hopefully will have here. Right. And so we need affordable housing for those people. And
who that happens to be is hard to really address by policy. But we do need homes that people can live in and to work here. But and don't matter. Well, I lived in Colorado, Oklahoma, lived in Louisiana, Florida, and every one of those places I have friends there, business, acquaintances there, and they all have the same problem. Not enough employees, or we don't have housing for the employees to bring them in. So many of the great people that I've seen over 20 years in this community, the kids do not have a place here. They go south, they go here, they go all over. And I mean, they were part of this community.
And you can look at the demographics of the state.
Yeah.
Aging state.
Yes.
Yeah. Which speaks plenty to that.
Yes. It's because we don't have the houses that we need. You know, also the with numbers about letting it down and want to get involved by getting involved in it. Good. All right. Just comments and questions.
I have Frank Miller. I've been doing economic development inventory of Main Street and the Kenny Mountains. Inventory all the businesses and by the North American Industry Classification System categorization, which results into what type of employee you would be looking for. Also to see what would fit in Plymouth and what would not, because you have to know what would not fit as much as what you'd like to see happen. One of the things that I think I've learned is everybody talks about the percent of nonprofit land. Well, I'll tell you what's the impact, what that's from. The town of Plymouth is the only town in the state of New Hampshire that has all 7 modes of transportation infrastructure within its bounds. The only other cities that have all 7 modes is Concord, Manchester, and Portsmouth. Now, the fact that we have this unique infrastructure within our bounds, I have to ask the question is, what's our return on investment? So we need to start thinking about that. On that list, the community character is actually 4 types of character. You have the terrain, our environment. You have the business community itself. You have the people is within this community. And then you have our structures, so-called, our houses, which we should be calling styles. So character could be the occupant of the structure, like senior housing, student housing, is the character of the occupant. But what we're really sensitive to is the style of the structure within a particular location. I believe that's where there's a lot of sensitivity for that hotel that's going out on Smith Bridge Road. Is it's out of character for the area and it's out of style for that community. The other part, the first zoning ordinance recodification, we should redo so that we have 7 zones in the town. Each zone in our zoning ordinance, it'd be the first one would be single family zone. With second we do multifamily zone. Every element that's in our regulations right now should be in that. So a person who has a house in single family residential looks in that zone. They don't have to go through the industrial commercial. They don't have to go through the agricultural. They go to that zone in our ordinance. The purpose statement, the principal reason why we have zoning is to mitigate, that's to reduce the impact of site, which is why we have our limitation of houses, site, really. Sound, we have a decibel limit at our boundary lines. Smell, when you produce a obnoxious odor, we'd like you to faint. Ground vibration, so that is a limitation where we know like trains or trucks that create a ground vibration between 7 and 14 cycles will wake up your puppies and your babies and you must sleep. Why a lot of trucks are allowed in a zone until at least 7 o'clock in the morning. And groundwater safety,
groundwater quality and safety is the last item. On that is our purpose of all of the codes and the specifications within an ordinance. So there's a lot of information that we've already gathered. It's partly looking at our master plan, but in implementation, I think the problem is we get into programs that are so large and get into millions of dollars that people look at it and say, not a chance, because we, the taxpayers, can't afford it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Adam? Julie, when we talk about that third bucket, and you talk about those tasks, are they all, just for clarification, are they all planning board tasks that are initiated by the planning board and then have to come to public hearing, or are there some bits and pieces that don't have to be totally regulatory like that? These are all regulatory, and these would all ultimately be in the hands of the planning board to decide to bring forward or not. I just I wanted a clarification, and I just want that. Yeah.
The way
When we talked about
character one in a non-regulatory way, I think you're looking at it from the regulators.
well, because it shows up in regulatory fees, so you want it to be clear.
I did want to say also one kind of follow-up on Frank, what you said, most of which I very much agree with. There is the danger of going too far with having single-family only in single-family neighborhoods and so on and so forth, which is the benefits of mixed use and having your amenities close to your dwelling and having walkable neighborhoods, including walkable to like your downtown and stuff like that. And sometimes that includes a little bit of mixing things up, a little bit of kind of mixed use and not just kind of single family here and that there. But in principle, yes, what you're saying is very true. Yes.
I just want to emphasize the district purpose statements point. The other part of what I'm thinking about hotels that we're all kind of referencing is that it is located in agricultural zone, which has a wide array of things allowed in it. And so I think having discussions about really, really specifically defining what we want to allow happen in those places. Because it sounded like people were open to a hotel, but maybe not right there. And so looking especially at the agricultural zone and figuring out what we want to actually have happen. And it's such a large part of the town that maybe we actually need to come up with some different solutions.
But I would just add in that regard, there is the very legitimate question of what should happen in the agricultural zone, and including hotels, for example. But there's also the question of where the boundaries are, because a lot of our biggest Tiny Mountain development is in the agricultural zone,
Right.
and not in what is actually more specifically zoned for. And so where the boundaries are is also an issue in some ways, for big ways in that. And yeah, there are some conversations potentially to be had there. And yes, that had a balance in those mentions. Other questions or comments?
It could tell in to say something.
Like one thing I want to pitch. It's what it pitches this. Now, so if you heard the conversations tonight, almost every one of them has at the very front of it the tax structure. Our tax structure is causing us all kinds of problems. I don't think there's any question about it. Tax structure has a problem. So one thing that we can do as residents of the town of Plymouth, we can join with residents of the other so-called poor towns, and we can fight off the rich towns. Because that's basically what it boils down to. The rich towns are well organized. They have their people out there, their consultants. They have their lawyers. They're swarming around in Concord, and they are wanting to make sure that their advantage doesn't get changed. And I'm talking about neighbor towns here, right? It's like this is really silly. But the reason that there's much that we can't do in our town is because we are not competitive. We're not competitive. And so all the planning that is fun or housing, for instance, is probably going to happen in different towns because of that situation. And if it happens here, it's going to cause our taxes to go worse. So until we get a handle on the major driver of our taxation system, which is our educational funding, which I want to pull back on now. I think that should be like one of our biggest community character issues, that's maintaining a really excellent education system. By cost money. Yeah. And we're always strained to make that payment twice a year. and it prevents things from happening here. That couldn't happen. So I think the little political action is called, even though this is not a political meeting, I'm saying to you, like, it's not, waiting for something to happen without having the necessary list and the environmental factors in place that would allow it is maybe lead to some disappointing results. Thank you.
So you're saying we declare war on lawyers?
Very much.
I think we should reobserve Hebron.
I know, brother. Yeah. It's over as a newly big rock. Right.
Are you going to illegal wilderness resident? Be careful. No.
So, like,
Obvious.
and it's not you personally, Patty. It's the system.
I totally get that. That's why
So
hopefully we can continue.
the biggest the biggest single factor is education and student is supporting your education. All this initiatives. Yes, we don't want to see in the position of clarifying. Right. Well, the chief industry in the town of Plymouth is academic industry, which is a $15 trillion economy. Again, we're not allowing ourselves the joy of receiving the financial investment and support from a lot of businesses and governments that would make some of these taxes that we are paying for that to go down. I'll give you an example. NASA just gave 7 universities $4 million this last October to research the environment of their airport. They could get that? No. Okay. So, no use having the location within a state, no use having a very good group of industry systems if we're not really going to allow it to work for. It's just like the drone facility that we've got to set it. Right.
Argument. But any other comments or questions?
I just wanted to remind everybody that you can take a moment, and if you've already done so, written any of your own answers to those questions. I'm happy to take it on your way out. If you want to take it home and fill it out, I'm sure I can connect with Joseph about getting those back from you as well. So, thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Continue.
The other thing, if you will as well, that we have a site visit to the hotel site at 5 o'clock on Thursday.